So what about the analyst as leader, and how have you found your role within doing that?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like new territory. So I think there's 3 or maybe 4 people now with my job title in the country, and we're doing it not to promote ourselves, but to promote a function. So we're in a process, and we're doing some work with people like yourselves and the Health Foundation and others to promote the role of a chief analytical officer, to literally write the job description for it, suggest what background you would need, suggest how that role would interact with a finance director, a chief medical officer, a chief exec, what it might do regionally, what it means for ICPs and ICS development. I think what's key to that role is kind of making that link between and this is it sounds sort of a silly way of saying it, but kind of the tattoos and the cufflinks. So it would be easy to characterize the analysts as having tattoos and droning on about open source all the time. And it would be easy to characterize decision makers or execs as wearing cufflinks and making big testosterone fueled decisions about where to open new services and so on. And I think we need to move away from us being cross and throwing stones. We need to do that a bit, but we need the Trojan horse. We need to kind of get in and amongst them, and sometimes cover our tattoos with cufflinks, talk their language, but also be able to come back and have a debate with, an external company about, well, why haven't you done an evaluation? You've suggested we do this, but you haven't provided an evaluation model, or you've just given us crude data instead of adjusted data. So you need to be able to kind of argue analytically, but also talk to the analyst as well. But most importantly, provide something that is understood at exec level, because ultimately those are the decisions that that's why those people are paid 6 figures to make big grand decisions about where to centralise stroke services, or how to open an urgent treatment centre, or which outpatients can be done digitally. You've got to be that really key translator between the analyst community and the execs.
An old hobby horse of mine is the role of chief analytical officer, or chief analyst. And interestingly, it was a job that Lorraine used to do when she was at NHS England, and we haven't had a chief analyst since Lorraine left. So I think there's a need for it at a more regional, local level. Interestingly, I think it would be something which would sit quite comfortably within an STP, and somebody then who provides not only a lightning rod for the community, but some you can say, well, if you were career-minded, aspirational, if you wanted a route to the, so I want to be a chief analyst. What do I need to do? Who do I? You've got role models then that people can aspire to become, and that's something we don't really have at the moment as well. So I think that's a bit of an issue.
I think my 2 big things are the levels, the different levels that analysts are represented at. So essentially a lot more analysts in senior positions, but not just, very senior positions. I'd like to see representation and roles for different analysts in all levels of the organisation. And I think that would also perhaps be benefited by having very senior figureheads in the central organisations as well, something like a sort of a head of profession or a chief analyst for an NHS analyst.
I think the third reason why analysis in health and care is probably not in a great place is, it sounds a bit venal, but what's the career path? What's the structure? And it's something that, if I'm being honest, it's something that's never worried me. But I've always been hovering around the centre. But I run into friends who get to a certain level in their organisations and then say, I had to become a strategy officer or something more generic, a planning officer, even though I'm doing broadly the same thing. But there would never be a chief analytical officer or a director of analysis in my trust unless they were dealing with IT or something very, very technical rather than analysis in the broader sense that we'd use it.
To be really honest, I think it's something that I'm still working out myself. because it changes so much. We're living in a really fast changing and fast paced working world, especially at the moment. So I think if you'd asked me 8 weeks ago what I thought an analytical leader is, it would probably give you a different answer to what I might give you now. I think that the critical element for an analytical leader is that translational piece, and supporting colleagues, not obviously at a leadership level, but actually throughout the whole of the workforce, and analytical colleagues as well, to really appreciate and articulate the value that analysts put my teeth back in, analysts and analysis can bring, and kind of at the beginning of the process, if you like, but then at the end, when we have that product, I think analytical leadership, and this is something that isn't just baked into people with director job titles, it's an element of leadership that needs to pervade right the way through all of the analytical workforce, is being able to then translate that into something that is meaningful for the people who are ultimately going to be making decisions on it, or reflecting on whatever the analysis that we're providing. I think that translational element is a leadership quality, and it's a leadership quality that needs to be across the piece, not just in the kind of specific roles. So I've started that in a very specific way and then broadened it out. Leadership is everybody's business. We need to be thinking and talking a lot more about what responsible leadership means in health analytics. And I don't just mean for people with manager or leader in their job title. I mean leadership, the kind of leadership that anybody working in health data analytics can show. And I think the main thing here is that it's not sufficient when you're working with health data to restrict your attention and your focus to the question about whether your data is answering the question given to you. Organizations like AI Now in the States and Ada Lovelace in the UK have made, I think, a very compelling argument that if you're working in health data, you need to be thinking about the context and engaging questions around what you want the world to look like. What should the NHS look like? What does high quality healthcare mean? How well is the organization doing? What needs to change and how? And it's engaging at that level and thinking about the impacts or potential impacts that the analysis can have, which I think is really at the crux of really good analytical leadership.
I think that the problem with being a leader of an intelligence team is you have to be a jack of all trades. It'd be great if you could be a master of all trades, but you're never going to be. And when I was at school, they didn't have machine learning, and AI was something we used in sci-fi movies to blow Dave out of the airlock. What you have to do is have a broad understanding of what people are capable of doing. And I think it's that part of understanding that whole breadth of what we need to do. And we need to be salespeople. And it's, you need to be able to share and make sure people understand what your team can do. And then how can they engage with it? Why aren't you using my team? Why would you ask for those third-party people to come in when we can do it? And how can we or what do you need from me to be able to help you understand what we can do? And it's that salesman's job. And I think that when you get to this level, my R is terrible, as my team will tell you, and they will laugh at some of the methods. But what we need to be able to do is understand what can be done, and then make sure that it's our job to get round and be as sharp-elbowed as possible, as pushy as is appropriate, so we don't get fired, but to make sure that the guys know what we can do. And because if we're not doing it, then no one's going to do it for us. Yeah?
I think we've seen a lot of organisations, obviously with chief information officers and now chief technology officers as well. And I think, one of my, I guess my reflection from that is that you, again, this is a generalisation, but you often end up with a real focus on the technical infrastructure and being at the cutting edge around things like IG and digital strategy for an organisation. But perhaps what you don't end up with is the same focus on really being at the cutting edge in terms of analysis, interpretation, and intelligence-led decision making. And I know what we're looking at is how you build the capability at leadership level with that perspective as well. I think that people whose main business is intelligence and analysis working at board level alongside other roles at that level. I think the leadership and training posts are one of the ways to get into this. And I know you're probably talking about it elsewhere on the day, but developing a program which starts to develop people with leadership skills and have the posts into which they can go as part of that change is really important.
So I've already talked a little bit about senior managers not having a good understanding of data, and I think something that would drive that is having someone, well, it depends. I mean, there's lots of different models. The model we presented in the manifesto is having it at board level, basically having a chief analyst at board level. There are chief everything else's. There is a chief finance person and a chief clinical person and a chief all these other things. But there is no one really there to champion that notion of data. I think some organisations have started to do it, but there's no real sort of there's no one way of doing it, and it hasn't been widely adopted. And I think that would be really useful for two reasons, really. Number one, because I think it would improve decision making at a board level. Because the decisions being made at board, again, looking back, talking again about the idea of implicit theories, the people at the board are using implicit theories of data and implicit theories of knowledge, and they're doing all that, but they're doing it without somebody at their level helping them to think about it in that way. They've got the finance officer saying, well, this will have this effect, and they've got that, and they've got the clinical person over here saying, well, if you do this, they've got all that perspective, but they don't have that perspective. And I think that's really important. But I think the other reason why it's important is because it would just filter down through the whole organization. So having someone, so for example, if I was a chief analytical officer and I was sitting at board level, it would be my absolute, overriding thing that I wanted to do all the time would be to get all this insight and all this ways of working and push it down through the organization and bring people up and have them working differently. Just like, the finance person is thinking about finance and the clinical, but, just like all the other people have got their things. That's not really happening with data. And I think, frankly, it shows.